Hi, my name is Greg Levine, and I'm a Senior Specialized Solution Architect in our end-user computing space with AWS. Today we're going to talk about moving your desktops and apps to AWS with Amazon WorkSpaces, AppStream, and WorkDocs. What we're going to try to cover today is a brief overview of some of today's challenges as we see them within the end-user computing space. We'll go into why customers choose AWS end-user computing services. We're going to do a brief overview with a couple of demos for Amazon WorkSpaces. Similarly, we're going to do an overview of Amazon AppStream 2.0 with a couple of demos there. Finally, a brief overview of Amazon WorkDocs, and then we'll get into some of the deployment considerations that you want to take into account as you're considering a deployment in your environment. With that, let's talk about how the way we work is changing. So today's end-user computing environment is certainly much more challenging than it ever has been. And the way people work has changed quite a bit as well. And so a couple of metrics that we have found to kind of highlight that point include the fact that 65% of employees say they'd be more productive with a flexible work policy, being able to work when you want, how you want, on what device you want. Another metric, 43% of workers worked remotely in 2018. I actually had a colleague of mine over in Europe who found a number that was actually higher, closer to 53% in 2018. So that number continues to climb. And then we have this new gig economy that involves temporary workers, contractors, and freelancers. And that includes 16 million people at this point. And so that sort of dynamic workforce and use case drives a different demand in end-user computing. Businesses too are moving faster than ever. In 20 years is the average age of a Fortune 500 company. That's just astounding when I think about it. $5 trillion was spent globally in the merger and acquisition activity in 2018, and that continues to climb. So not only are companies younger than they were a decade ago, but more money is spent on acquisition activity and trying to combine or merge companies through those sorts of activities from an end-user computing space offers a big opportunity as well as a challenge. While this dynamic workforce and end-user computing demands continues to change and those demands continue to rise, the importance of security also continues to rise. Just to highlight that, 4.5 billion records were exposed in the first half of 2018. 34% of data breaches are lost or stolen devices and documents. It's quite a high number. $3.8 million was the average cost of a data breach in 2018. Again, significant cost, significant effort, significant exposure. How do we combat that? So the challenges for IT to meet the needs of these end users in today's environment includes costly on-premises infrastructure, making sure it's redundant. Oftentimes that results in having redundant systems that maybe are not working 100% of the time, just waiting for a business resumption or disaster resumption activity. The complex application management capabilities that are required. Employees are spending a lot of time managing software they need to do their job. As a result of all this, IT spends a lot of time and expense implementing accessibility and security solutions. And we hear often there are still big gaps in the application management space. Unsecured personal devices, BYOD strategies, they introduce their own security and support risks that often aren't accessible or too expensive for IT. And finally, we get into this poor user experience. So not only are you trying to provide a great user experience in a secure manner and making sure that it's available, end users today are reporting that even with those efforts, the experience is not optimal. And so the other thing we've heard is that existing solutions undercut the very productivity they're trying to enable. Employees are having to jump through hoops just to be able to connect to the network, and good luck trying to establish a VDN connectivity on your phone while you're holding your coffee. So, in an attempt to address this, and with today's overall IT trends. 76% of organizations are either in the process of investigating or using cloud desktops. And 77% of cloud desktop users feel that cloud desktops are more secure than a traditional desktop environment. So once again, end users and organizations are turning to the cloud to try to overcome some of the challenges in today's environment. So why are customers choosing AWS End-User Computing? There are three main points here that we hear. One is to give users anywhere, anytime access to company data and applications on their favorite devices. Again, that anywhere, anytime, any device type of user experience. At the same time, helping IT maintain data security, reduce complexity, and improve user productivity. And finally, many organizations had already applied the core benefits of AWS to their own IT transformation. And so extending this into their end user space makes a lot of sense as we move forward. So how does the cloud transform end user computing? A couple of key points here. One, again, being able to access resources anywhere on any device. Certainly the cloud offers that flexibility and scalability to put these applications and desktops where end users need them and when they need them. Scalability and flexibility. By doing so, being able to do that dynamically and quite easily enables innovation. On the other side, we start talking about improving security and control, giving end users what they need, that anytime, anywhere access, while improving the security posture and giving IT the control they need. Obviously, the quicker and the faster that we can provide those capabilities and access to applications and data increases user productivity. And obviously, from an organization perspective, simplifying IT operations while reducing spend, continuing to build upon that infrastructure that may already be in the cloud or is in the process of going there. So with that, AWS end-user computing services include Amazon WorkSpaces, which is a secure managed cloud desktop workers can access anywhere, anytime from any supported device. Amazon AppStream 2.0 is a secure managed application streaming service that provides users instant access to desktop applications from any computer, anywhere, at any time. Amazon WorkLink, which is a secure managed service that provides your employees secure one-click access to your internal corporate websites and web apps using their mobile phones. And finally, last but not least, Amazon WorkDocs, which is a secure managed content creation, file collaboration management service that includes an extensible SDK to be able to build those customized solutions. Today, these services help end users get their job done on any device, anywhere, securely and quickly. With these services, we have a number of customers, as you can see, that have implemented one or multiples of these services. They come in any sort of many different types of verticals and segments within the enterprise: healthcare and life sciences, media, entertainment, manufacturing, insurance, financial services, independent software vendors, and public sector groups, government agencies, academic institutions, and nonprofits. All of these are using AWS EUC and related productivity services. Our customers often start out with a few specific projects before expanding into more core enterprise scenarios or replacing legacy VDI in mobile management solutions. So with that, let's get into Amazon WorkSpaces. So Amazon WorkSpaces handles the heavy lifting of managing user device hardware at scale. With Amazon WorkSpaces, we're able to leverage and take advantage of AWS global infrastructure, and WorkSpaces is built on top of solutions that have already solved many hard problems, such as EC2, EBS, VPC Direct Connect, and those solutions that have many characteristics you want to see in a global EUC infrastructure. When I talk to customers, I always talk about the fact that Amazon WorkSpaces and AppStream I equate them to Lego building block type of solutions, meaning they're built on top of existing AWS services, such as EC2 and VPC, as I mentioned earlier. So With that, there are 4 pillars to the Amazon Workspaces that I like to highlight. One are the secured cloud desktops. The model itself is inherently secure. Data and applications in the workspace environment reside within the AWS cloud, and therefore remain independent of the hardware device the user may be using to access those workspaces. The second part of it is the pay-as-you-go model. That scale up, scale out, scale where you need it, but only pay for what you use certainly applies to Amazon Workspaces. You will only be charged for those instances or workspaces that you are using at any given time. Simple to deploy and to manage from an IT perspective, right? The ability to quickly provision workspaces in what regions they're required and for which user groups certainly makes Workspaces an attractive offering. And as we talk about security and scalability, they must also be able to perform, and Workspaces hits the bill there. So at the end of the day, what we have is a highly interactive cloud desktop that users love in a form of a desktop as a service offering. So let's talk about a demonstration of Amazon Workspaces, highlighting that last point of being able to scale where you need it, when you need it, and being able to do so very quickly from a manageability perspective. Having spent 20 plus years as a desktop architect and administrator at a couple of Fortune 500 sized organizations, it never failed that a few times a year, maybe it was a few times a month it seemed, I had a director or a team leader come to me and say, hey, I forgot, I need 30 workspaces as I have consultants starting tomorrow. Is there anything you can do to provide me with an end user computing device back in the day, or certainly solution as we start talking about today? And so with that, let's talk about a demonstration scenario. Most of the time in that conversation, it would be a back and forth saying, well, I'll see what I can do, and obviously what strings you can pull. With Workspaces, again, at any time, anywhere access, being able to do it simply in whatever region. Let's highlight that fact. And so what I'm going to do is show the power of the AWS API for Workspaces and address the needs of this particular user or director that has come to me with this request for 30 workspaces. And so what they told me behind the scenes is that these users are going to be residing in our New York region. And so we have 30 contractors starting tomorrow. These contractors will be bringing their own device, but they want to have a secure computing platform. And so what I'm going to show today is a pretty short PowerShell script. As you can see, I think there's more lines in the header than there is in the code, and it's going to read a CSV file that we'll open here in a second. But let's go ahead and kick this thing off. And so I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to point to the path of my CSV file, which is WS input. I named it New York for my New York users. I'm going to hit return, and we're going to see that those workspaces are being provisioned. And we'll take a look at that in the AWS console. So let's look at this file here. What you can see is it's a pretty simple CSV file. I'm putting a user ID, the directory service ID that you establish on Workspaces. We're going to go over this these components. Which region? US East in this case. And what's the bundle ID or the OS and application set and hardware type that I'm going to provision for these users. And so with that, it looks like the script is done. I'm going to go ahead and flip over to my AWS console, and let's see what we've got. So you can see I'm logged in as myself as the administrator. I'm in the US East or Northern Virginia region, and I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh. And we can start seeing all of these workspaces that I just provisioned, the 30 of them. As we scroll through, let me get to the end. And we'll do a quick sort on my username. And you can see all of my New York users are in a pending state, meaning they're all available or will be available within 20 minutes. And so just like that, I have a satisfied director. I will have 30 satisfied end users who will be starting tomorrow as contractors with the organization. And I've done that with just a handful of lines in PowerShell along with the AWS tools for PowerShell. So we've just seen how quickly and easily it is to deploy workspaces. In this case, I picked a random number of 30, could have been 100, could have been 2. So how are customers using workspaces? We're seeing all sorts of different types of use cases when I talk to customers. One, they're trying to provide mobile and provide access to a desktop for mobile and remote employees, whether those are contractors working in a physical location, offshore possibly, or just employees working from home, such as myself. We see partners, consultants, and temporary employees are great end user cases for workspaces. Being able to provision those workspaces, give them the ability to have access to their workspaces, their applications, at what bundle size, hardware size, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. As I mentioned earlier at the top, mergers and acquisitions. Customers are constantly coming to us asking how workspaces can help them to improve the speed and availability of applications in an M&A type scenario on both sides of the M&A scenario while systems are being migrated. And finally, in today's current environment, many customers are going through the VDI refresh process and looking on alternatives for replacement of VDI infrastructure that might be in place and or project-based work. And these are just four of the highlighted options that are there. It's amazing to me as I go out and talk to customers how many different use cases and how creative customers are getting in terms of meeting today's demands of the end user space. You're looking at a picture of reInvent last year where we provisioned over 700 workspaces across 2 regions to provide hands-on labs as well as certification kiosks for the various attendees. Again, was able to scale that up in both regions using a simple PowerShell script to do all 700 in each region within an hour's amount of time. The thing that's amazing when you go into a room this size is just how quiet it can be with 0 clients running. You go into a room back in the day with PCs or laptops running and you'd hear that hum of the fan. And these rooms is quiet, which is critically important for those folks taking a certification exam. So let's talk about security in workspaces. Again, the model itself is inherently secure. I mean, there's no sensitive data on the user's device. Users are simply using their device as a way to access their workspace remotely. Storage on the workspace itself or within the AWS cloud is certainly encrypted at rest, as well as the bits that are being transmitted, the screenshots, the mouse clicks, the keyboard clicks are also encrypted in transit. Therefore, workspaces is a very secure environment through the model and through the encryption options that are available. Now, when I mentioned prior to coming to AWS 3.5 years ago in this role, I was on the customer side. And frankly, this was the slide that most excited me as an end user computing architect and administrator. The ability to seamlessly integrate with my current infrastructure and the investment that has already been made in those various facilities was critically important to me. WorkSpaces integrates quite nicely with your intranet environment. Certainly Active Directory with your organizational units and group policies that are currently in place and hardened from a security perspective to be able to take advantage of that infrastructure. Should MFA be required, a multi-factor authentication, as long as it's radius-based, that seamlessly integrates with WorkSpaces. The one that was most important to me was the systems management and the patch management capabilities, such as SCCM, BigFix, WSUS. There are many others. That works quite well with WorkSpaces. In my experience, I had an SCCM infrastructure with 3,500 different application packages that have been tested, signed off, and were ready to use. At a huge investment of cost and effort from a application management or application owner perspective. So being able to continue to move forward and take advantage of that existing infrastructure was critical, and certainly certificate authorities. So certainly the whole concept here is the ease in which you can integrate with your existing on-premises tools and infrastructures on your network makes WorkSpaces a very attractive option. So I'm going to start getting into some of the specific components of Amazon WorkSpaces. And one of the main considerations are the directory service options. WorkSpaces does require one of 3 potential directory service offerings. The first one is our Active Directory connector, which is a stateless proxy that you can use connect to your Microsoft Active Directory. It only supports direct Active Directory connectivity. It is not what I would call available in what I would call a standalone option. Basically, in this scenario, you have a role ID that has read access to your users and groups and create and join access to a specific OU or domain based on whichever preference you prefer. Our second scenario is our second offering is our AWS Microsoft Active Directory for Enterprise. It is a true Microsoft AD implementation as a managed service. So you can get out of this allows you to get out of the Active Directory management game, and you can certainly provision this service and have full control of the OU infrastructure, your group policies, all those considerations that you would require within an Active Directory. This scenario you can use in either a standalone mode, meaning it doesn't need obviously on-prem Active Directory connectivity, meaning it just runs in its own environment. Or you can certainly integrate it via traditional AD Trust with your on-prem infrastructure and Active Directory as it is today. Completely your preference. Our third one is what we call our Simple AD. It's free, but I always highlight to customers that it's really intended for a proof of technology or proof of concept type scenario. It's a Samba v4, and it only runs in a standalone option. There is not a way to link this with your existing on-prem Active Directory. And then the fourth bullet that I put down here is a hybrid solution that we're seeing a lot of, where you have your existing on-prem Active Directory that you're essentially extending into AWS on an EC2 instance. And so what we see there is domain controllers that are on-prem or both on-prem with DCs in the cloud, as I just mentioned. You can have these either linked with our managed Microsoft Active Directory or more commonly our Active Directory connector. And in this scenario, should this be of interest, and as I said, one that we're seeing quite a lot of, just to highlight a point, your domain controllers and global client logs on the VPC is certainly a recommendation. And then if you do that, you want to ensure that your sites and subnets are configured accordingly. And so that's how we start the integration with your on-prem Active Directory through our AD connector or through Trust with AWS and Microsoft Active Directory for Enterprise. So let's talk about some of the flexibility involved with the scenario, and we'll actually walk through the console to highlight some of these. WorkSpaces from a physical device perspective, we offer a physical client or an installable client for desktops, laptops, Mac OS, Windows, of course. From a mobile device, we certainly support the tablets, and we actually do have a web access client that can be enabled for your specific WorkSpaces needs. Basically, when I talk to customers, I say we support anything above and beyond a cell phone at this point with our installable client. From an operating system, we currently offer 3 today. Our Windows 10, our Windows 7 that will be available through the January for new customers with the Microsoft support dates coming to a close. And then we also, last summer, released our Amazon Linux operating system. And so again, these are the operating systems that are available to you to run on the WorkSpaces and the virtualized environment within the cloud. Bundle types, and so when we talk about the hardware options, we offer actually today 7 different offerings, and we'll go into some more of those details here as we walk through the console. And then flexible pricing. We have a couple of different arms that can be, or levers that can be pulled. We have a monthly or an hourly option, and then we also have a BYO option for Windows licensing customers, and we'll talk about those options as we get into a demo here with the console. Kind of breaking out Amazon, the Amazon Linux offering, what does that basically entail? It is running Amazon Linux 2, which is a part of is a CentOS fork. WorkSpaces is on the LTS branch. It uses the Mate desktop environment, which is a fork of the Genome 2, and it doesn't require GPU acceleration. From a manageability perspective, Yum is the primary tool. And you certainly will have direct access to the AWS repos from a maintenance perspective, and because it's Linux, you certainly can add the repos that you may want to and need to. One other offering I like to highlight for our customers is our Amazon WorkSpaces Cost Optimizer, which is a fully supported solution offering. And basically, as we talk about, as we get into the running modes that are available, the always on or the monthly or the auto stop or the hourly, this will allow you the flexibility through an automatic method to either report on which workspaces may not be performing in a cost optimized manner, or you can actually set it and forget it and just let it go ahead and switch that bit to make sure that it is optimized. It is running in an optimized manner based on the previous 30 days usage. So we'll come back and talk about the cost optimizer. So let's talk about the provisioning and some of these components in a little more detail. So with that, I'm going to go over to my WorkSpaces console once again. And so I'm going to go into our Toronto location in Canada, as I ran through this at the Toronto Summit for some customers a few weeks ago. So we can see what I have set up today in my Canada Central region is I have 3 existing directory services. I've got an Active Directory connector that's tied to my on-prem Active Directory. I have another AD connector that's tied to an MFA implementation. And I actually have a Microsoft Managed AD environment set up in that environment. So my directory service has been established. Let's go through a quick launch of a workspace. And so the first thing I'm going to do is pick my directory services that we just reviewed. And so I'm going to go with my on-prem Active Directory. And I have set up for today's webinar, a webinar user 1. Let's see if I've got that available. There he is. And just to highlight, you can see that my role ID that I've established on my domain allows me the ability to read all the users and groups that are available. And so you can see I have 297 such things in my current on-prem Active Directory. And so I'm going to go ahead and just go with my webinar. So we're going to go ahead and select him. And now we'll talk about the bundles. And when we talk about bundles and workspaces, we talk about 2 different things. What is the operating system and application set, i.e. the image you want to use? And what are the hardware types that are available? And so you can see we have the various hardware types that are available, value through Power Pro, the CPU and memory for Linux, and I like to use this one. And that we also have the root volume sizes. It's the WorkSpaces is a 2-volume option. WorkSpaces is a 2-volume model. There's the traditional system model, and then there's a USM or a profile volume that WorkSpaces are built upon. These are the default sizes for the various hardware types that you see here. These can be increased either at provision time or after provisioning. You can increase each of them up to 1 terabyte in size. As we scroll down, you can see that we have a number of options here, and because I picked Canada, we actually are not showing our graphics or Graphics Pro options. But I do have a custom bundle that I created here, and you can see that this will be using Windows 10 with some custom applications that I've added, and I've tied it to our performance offering. And I've also reset the volume sizes. So let's go ahead and provision this bundle type. So we have our individual user, our webinar user 1. We have our ADC, or Active Directory connector, from an AWS directory service perspective, and now we have a bundle. Running modes. So again, this is the running modes that I mentioned earlier from a cost optimizer perspective. We have our always on and our auto stop. Our always on, or monthly, as you will hear it, is just that. It's a flat monthly rate with a little bit of variability based on the region type and the bundle type that you select. And it's a flat monthly cost. It's on 24/7, 365, minus any reboots needed by patching or systems management solutions or anything that may have been initiated by an end user. Our auto stop, or what we sometimes refer to as our hourly running mode option, is a little bit different model. You have a very smaller, a flat monthly rate with an hourly rate tied to it. The auto stop, the way this performs is that you, if I provision a workspace in auto stop mode, when a user disconnects for the night, so let's say a traditional 8 to 5 workday, if I have this currently a workspace provision with auto stop and I as the administrator pick just an hour of a disconnect timeout, let's walk through that scenario. At 5 o'clock when the user goes home for the evening, 1 hour later or at 6 o'clock, the workspace, whether it's Linux or Windows or BYOL, will go into a hibernate mode, a traditional Windows type hibernate mode. And once it goes into that hibernate mode, the meter stops again. So you're only charged for the hours that the workspace is running. When it goes into that hibernate mode, the billing stops. At 8 a.m., when that user comes in the next morning, they will go ahead and authenticate to their workspace, and we'll walk through that process here shortly. And they will, that authentication process tickles the workspace to wake up. So there is a little bit of a traditional Windows type of wake up from a hibernate. And at that point, the meter starts and the user is able to run. The rough break even going into the cost optimizer conversation we had a little bit earlier is roughly about 80 hours. Again, roughly because it depends on the hardware type and the region you're running the workspace. So if those workspaces are under 80 hours, meaning they're auto stop on under 80 hours, that would be an optimized type scenario, and roughly over, you wouldn't want to start thinking about the always on. And that cost optimizer can do that analysis for you on a workspace by workspace basis. We move on to encryption. So as mentioned before, you can encrypt your volumes for your workspaces. Amazon Workspaces leverages the Amazon KMS service. You can bring your own key. You can use one that's a service provisions, but you can also determine which or both volumes you want to encrypt. I like to highlight for customers, this is the one of two options that you have to make a decision at provisioning time. You either have to know that you're going to encrypt or not encrypt, and which volumes when you provision, and the second option being that directory service. You cannot switch a directory service once you provision a workspace, and you cannot encrypt or decrypt based on provisioning a provisioning time decision. Other than that, each of the configurations, including hardware types, can be changed, in volume types, the running mode, obviously. So there's a lot of flexibility post-provisioning with your workspaces. And then tagging. Tagging simply adds metadata to your workspace you can use for supportability with IAM as well as billing purposes. And a lot of customers are using a lot of different options for this if they so choose. Again, all of that is available through the API. I wouldn't recommend using the console for environments much above 50 workspaces. The API is where your manageability focus should be as you start scaling up. So let's go ahead, and we're going to go ahead and launch a workspace. And within 20 minutes, I would see that those workspaces are become available. And so it's in a pending mode. I expect to see that come back in an availability mode such as this one. So closing the workspaces story, we have a customer success story with Yamaha. As they said here, performance and stability is better than before, and we were able to introduce the solution quickly. Best of all, Amazon Workspaces did not require any upfront investment, and we pay only for what we use. We are now working to retire on-premise VDI solutions entirely. And that's a refrain I hear from Workspaces customers on a regular basis. Let's move ahead into Amazon AppStream. We built AppStream to provide customers a new way to deliver apps. AppStream is a fully managed application streaming service that delivers desktop applications to any computer without rewriting them. As with all our EUC customers, AppStream delivers your applications with the benefits of AWS. We see a number of different use cases that we'll get into, but the 4 pillars here that I like to highlight, it's a secure application streaming solution. You use your HTML5 browser to essentially remote into your application and provide the access to the application and data from within the AWS cloud to the end user's device through that AWS or that HTML5 browser. These are centrally managed applications. You are able to scale these up, scale them out when and how you want. You can do them through traditional EC2 type scaling policies that are either time-based or utilization-based. And you can certainly do this from a number of different regions that's currently supported by the AppStream service. Much like WorkSpaces, it integrates pretty seamlessly with your existing IT infrastructure. So group policies come into play, as we talked about before. Certainly access to on-premises utilities that you might need, intranet services, those sorts of things, and most importantly, application and data. That becomes a very easy conversation with AppStreams. And the scale, being able to scale up and out, whichever region, as I mentioned, and certainly within your stacks and your user community. So being able to deliver your desktop applications to any computer. So some of the ways that we see in talking to customers that and how you can use AppStream, and this is just an example of a few, there are many others, from a business application perspective, simplifying application delivery, whether those are complex applications that have a lot of moving parts, maybe they're applications that are updated on a frequent basis that makes manage them on individual devices as challenging, or applications that maybe require additional computing power that the physical device doesn't have. So from a business application perspective, we see enterprises looking at AppStream as a way to supplement their application management and utilization scenarios. 3D design and engineering. This really talks about the power of the graphics capabilities that AppStream brings to the table. We're going to start talking about some of the different hardware families, and graphics is a big one here. Also, compute and memory intensive applications play well with this. Being able to provide these applications and devices that don't have those capabilities, AppStream allows that for that sort of flexibility. Software vendors, we do a lot of conversation and have a number of software vendors that are able to deliver trials and demos and training type scenarios through AppStream. They're able to create a SaaS type solution without any rewrites of their existing Windows applications. And finally, educational institutions. I've had a lot of conversations with universities and colleges alike where physical lab space is being pulled back from those students because of the need to expand the classroom space. And so more and more educational institutions are turning to virtualization and lab-based solutions such as AppStream to be able to provide the computing resources students require without having to go to a physical lab. This also works for enhanced distance learning. More universities and educational organizations are moving on or wanting to offer more flexible capabilities in terms of being able to offer classroom type environments as well as labs and educational tools off campus, and certainly AppStream can help manage that. Mentioned earlier, there's multiple different instance families, right? So we have a general purpose, compute optimized, where there's a higher CPU to memory ratio, a memory optimized, kind of the reverse of that, depending on the application type, and then graphics optimized. We actually have 3 subfamilies of this, of graphic options that are available. So being able to pick the instance type that fits the characteristics of your individual applications and workloads, there are a number of different options. I should mention that each of these has multiple different options available within these families. Looking specifically at the graphics families, you can see that we have the graphics design, graphics desktop, and the graphics pro, and some of the specs that go along with them from a GPU memory, a vCPU capability, and then certainly the instance memory itself, and the libraries and GPU vendors that are affiliated with each. And so we see customers being able to take advantage of one or more of these to be able to facilitate those applications that have these requirements. And again, allowing those end users to do so on a lighter device, including tablets. So let's talk about the workflow. So you as the administrator, how do I get an application to an end user? And so the first thing you will do is provision an image builder, which is basically, and again, you, the administrator, are only using your HTML5 browser. So all that's required. So you will log into your provision an image builder. You will install and configure your applications just like you would today on an individual server or desktop. And once you have those applications configured and ready to use, you will launch your image assistant, which is utility that's included in an image builder. And you will use this to define the look and feel icons of your applications. What are you going to call them? What are those launch parameters? They'll be optimized for performance with AppStream so that as a user clicks, the application launches as quickly as possible. You can configure some default user settings based on the requirements of your application. And ultimately, you will create an image itself. And that single image is what is used across the individual instances that users will then be provisioned when they go to use their application. So once we have an image, we then go into define a fleet. And a fleet is really what I like to call kind of the nuts and bolts of the AppStream environment. Here you determine what your virtual private cloud and subnets you're going to use to provision these instances. What instance type will you use for your end users? Will this be a domain join type option? And if so, what's your domain configuration for which organization unit? And then no less important, and a highlight here with AppStream is your scaling configurations. You can do time-based, both up and down, as well as utilization-based. And so scaling policies come into play here from a configuration perspective. And once we have a fleet that's tied to our specific instance, we then can provision a stack. And a stack is kind of that outer shell, if you will, of the overall AppStream environment. And here you really focus on some of the look and feel and user capabilities. So being able to pick which fleet you want to use, which storage options are available to you, persistent. We support, we have an S3 home drive persistent folder storage option that's available. We support natively Google Drive and OneDrive, and you certainly can tie into things like WorkDocs and Windows SFX, and as well as any on-prem storage options that might be available, home drives and those sorts of things. And you can then also customize the branding of the launch page in the application catalog. And ultimately, once that stack's provisioned, the end user through AD and SAML or user pools, if they're not AD joined, will then grant access, will then get access to their application. So we'll walk through a quick demo of that scenario. Before we do so, let's talk about a customer success story. Compuware. Compuware uses Amazon AppStream 2.0 to deliver their Topaz solution on AWS as the industry's first cloud access to modern mainframe development with a comprehensive suite of mainframe development and testing tools designed to help developers, regardless of experience, understand and work on any programs, no matter how old or complex, so their companies can easily maintain and innovate with their mainframe investments. So what I want to walk through from a demonstration scenario is a scenario where maybe I have I'm going to use a workspace as a launch point for a couple of different reasons that we'll get into. But the idea here is that maybe I have what I would call a lower end from a bundle hardware type perspective workspace that needs to get access to an AppStream or a GPU intensive application that we're going to facilitate with AppStream. And so I'm going to go ahead and log into my workspace. And I've got a user that I had set up earlier. So let's go ahead and launch from the Workspaces console. And I'm going to do a couple of touch-based things. I'm going to step back to the Workspaces space just briefly once I configure here. And so let's talk about my Workspaces environment. So you can see that I am giving this presentation actually on a MacBook Air, but I've launched a Windows 10 Amazon Workspace. It was a custom bundle, so you can see how I've installed Chrome, FileZilla, Notepad++. This one actually was integrated with my SCCM environment. And so I've got my custom bundle, and then I've also created a couple of icons and as well as OpenOffice on here. First thing I want to show is that I have some GPUs. So each of my GPOs that I've set up in my on-prem environment simply adds a tag for where it's located in my hierarchy. And so I just want to highlight that these are GPO configurations that are dropped from my on-prem Active Directory into my Amazon workspace. They would also be dropped in my Amazon AppStream instances as well. So I am getting my full GPO as and a couple other things. So when you launched, you saw obviously the Toronto skyline. Again, this was a demonstration I'd set up for the Toronto Summit a few weeks ago. And so therefore you see the picture that's being dropped for the Toronto Summit. That's being applied via my on-prem domain policy. Another couple of options that I want to talk about. So let's look at my drive mappings. And so on this workspace, you can see I have 3 drive mappings. I have my profile D drive. It's obviously not mapped, that's part of the workspace. But I have through Active Directory, I have a home drive share that's actually set up on an on-prem file server in my environment. That's the node over here. I have a Windows FSX based team share, and this S drive is mapped through a group policy option tied to my user. And so you can see that this is hosted on my Windows Windows FSX. And then finally, I have my WorkDocs drive that I've logged into from that I've also got installed on this workspace. So now let's see that again, this was a performance-based workspace that I set up. And I'm going to try to launch Blender, which is a open source emulator solution, and you can see that I get prompted with an error message when I tried to launch this, and this is not good. So my system doesn't use 3D hardware acceleration. That's true. This is not a GPU-enabled workspace. It's trying to access through a remote connection. Well, that's true as well. I'm trying to connect from my laptop, my MacBook Air to a VM, and so it's not working from that perspective. And of course, I'm also trying to use it from a workspace, or in this case, a virtual machine. So there's no chance I'm going to be able to launch a Blender on this workspace based on its requirements. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've got an icon set up to launch my AppStream stack. And so let's go ahead and move over to the AppStream conversation. Set up my AppStream access through an AWS single sign-on configuration. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch this graphic design stack. So it's signing me into my stack. Again, it's using the base image. I'm connecting, and I should see my application catalog pop up. So we have my application options. Let's click my view catalog. There we go. So we have 5 different applications that I've configured within my image. And again, I'm running on my own dedicated AppStream graphics design instance here. I'm going to go ahead and launch File Explorer. In File Explorer, I'm launching for a couple of reasons. One, I want to show that you see that I have my same 3 mapped drives that you saw on my workspace, again, because this is domain joined and I'm the same user. I have my home drive that's pointed to my on-prem file server. I have my Windows FSX team share here, and I also have my my WorkDocs drive that you saw just on my workspace. And so I have access to the same capabilities that I had before. In addition, I have my home folder, which is a persistent file storage specific for AppStream if I didn't have access to these other 3 options that I've configured. So there's my my home drive scenario. So let's go ahead and launch this application, this Amazon Web Services application. I'm not sure what that is. And so I highlight this for a couple of reasons. I mentioned earlier in the administration process, you can do a couple of things with in terms of how you configure your applications. This application I'm running is nothing more than Chrome. Chrome has a well-established and well-known launch parameters that you can facilitate the launching. And so for this example with Chrome, I've done a couple of things. One, I set the home drive to point to the AWS Amazon.com. I also disabled the auto update capabilities as well as the first run experience. Again, those were all command line driven. I also obviously set the name of the application to AmazonWebServices.com, and I also then went ahead and gave it this custom icon. Again, highlighting the capability and flexibility you have to make the changes and configure your applications as you so choose. But the real reason I'm here, going back to my original use case, is Blender. I couldn't launch it on my workspace, so let's try it here on my app streaming server. And so you can see, A, it launches, so we're already ahead of the game. And B, I can now use the graphic intensive capabilities that are provided through this graphic design instance to do what I needed to do. And I'm not going to take the time to render this application, but you can see I'm running this through my HTML5 browser, and I just lost my cube. But you can see that the performance from just being able to move things around is really quite snappy. Now, again, I ran this within a workspace to deal with to demonstrate a conversation of a scenario that I'm seeing quite often with customers, being able to provide one or both solutions. There's no reason I couldn't have run this demonstration directly from my MacBook itself, from a browser within that. So I think you can see the value of not only AppStream and the flexibility it brings, in this case being able to launch an application that I couldn't simply launch from where I was trying to before, in this case a workspace. So let's go back to, let's start talking just a little bit about Amazon WorkDocs. Is a secure, easy to use cloud storage service that allows you to store content, files, and documents across teams and collaborate on projects. I think one of the key capabilities that we see with Amazon WorkDocs is the extensible SDK that allows a lot of flexibility in design and customization for your end users based on their needs and application wants. Some of the ways that we see Amazon WorkDocs being used today, again, just some specific examples. It allows you to keep all your content stored in one place, accessible from anywhere, anywhere, and is certainly secure. You can replace large legacy network file shares. Customers like Gateway Engineers and Signet Maritime Corp are retiring legacy on-prem network file shares to allow access from anywhere. These customers say that it vastly improves the user productivity and reduces overall operating costs. And then there's the extensive SDK. You can use that to integrate with directly to build value add solutions on top of WorkDocs. This is something Xerox is doing for LA County. By integrating with WorkDocs SDKs, LA County users can send and receive fax communications that are automatically stored in the user's WorkDocs folder. This approach is helping streamline communications and collaborations between LA County employees and various contractors and suppliers. So a lot of capabilities can be leveraged. Halliburton, just to highlight a specific customer success story, they're using WorkDocs for secure central storage for user files. These users needed access files anywhere, anytime from mobile and desktop devices itself, and they are certainly now in the process of custom application building using the SDK. Some of the deployment considerations that I just wanted to highlight real briefly as we look to wrap up here is the AWS account structure. Again, our services, the end user computing services, follow some general AWS best practices, including AWS account structure. And so being able to set up end user computing specific accounts that tie into a centralized logging and billing capability that exists certainly continues to flow forward as you think about expanding your current AWS infrastructure into the end user computing space. Some network design notes. So a couple of quick notes here. Amazon WorkSpaces requires 2 subnets in different availability zones. It absolutely requires. It has to have them to facilitate the directory services implementation and availability. Amazon AppStream, we say, should be deployed across 2 subnets in different availability zones. So I talk to customers that are looking at one or both solutions. They certainly can use both of the environments within the same subnets as they so choose, not required. But if they do so, you just to make sure that you keep that WorkSpaces requirement of having 2 subnets in different availability zones at top of mind. And then the other thing is, just from a good IP utilization perspective, make sure those subnets are sized accordingly. Don't create a /16 subnet if you don't need it. Again, this applies to both WorkSpaces and AppStream on the individual instances. Each instance has 2 network interfaces. There's the ETH0, which is used by the managed service of each service, and ETH1 would be the interface tied to your VPC, which is the traditional network your end users would use to get to things like email, the internet, databases, that sort of thing, applications. As a result, you have full control of what's going on with ETH1, routing rules, security groups, AWS security groups, in terms of what ports you want to enable and what protocols. You have full control on the ETH1, and the user traffic is routed between file servers, backend databases, how you want based on the connection between your virtual private cloud infrastructure and your on-prem infrastructure. So then customers will ask me, why are you telling me about both network interfaces? Well, you as the administrator need to be aware of both in case you're running any firewalls locally on those instances. If so, you have to make sure the ports are enabled for ETH0, which those solutions will find, so that the service will work seamlessly. So just a bit of awareness from an administrator perspective. Directory integration, so let's talk about that. Last key point here. WorkSpaces, as we talked about earlier, can be joined to an AWS AD through the Active Directory connector and or the Microsoft Managed Active Directory through trusts. And AWS Directory Service is required to connect users to their workspaces. It's not an option. You have to have one of those three directory service options. AppStream follows more of the traditional EC2 join model, if you will. Fleets can be domain joined, or they can be run in a standalone mode. You don't have to have it tied to a directory service or an AD or LDAP type scenario. If you're going to do the AD joint fleets, you will need to integrate via SAML with your identity provider. And we have a lot of good documentation on a number of the different solutions that are out there from a SAML perspective. We just walked through a scenario in my demonstration with AWS SSO being the SAML provider for my domain joint fleets. A couple AD recommendations: extend your AD into AWS and on Amazon EC2. I talked about that scenario a little bit earlier in the webinar. Use a cross-account VPC pairing for communications to a shared services VPC. So if you're early going, maybe that's not the case, but if you're more and deeper into your AWS story, you may have a shared services VPC set up for things like system management solutions, Active Directory, security appliances, those sorts of things. You certainly want to define your VPCs in your Active Directory sites and services to help manage the AD related traffic. And we also recommend that both for AppStream and WorkSpaces that you separate your ADOUs by service and region. So nest a WorkSpaces OU under your computing, existing computing OU structure, so those group policies you have in place flow through. And then we also suggest that you would add another one underneath that WorkSpaces or AppStream OU to separate by region in case there's any regional specific configurations you might want to apply. So I strongly encourage you to continue to go through, to continue to try those and see if they can meet the needs of your environment. And with that, we'll move on to some questions and answers. And thank you.